A millionaire falls in love with a girl he once wronged, but now their fate will depend on the luck of both of them. What happens next? The Marlow Hotel stood as a beacon of opulence against the grey Edinburgh skyline. Its grand facade, adorned with ornate stone carvings and towering windows, seemed to exude an air of timeless elegance. Tonight, the hotel was alive with energy. Luxury cars pulled into the circular drive, their engines purring softly as chauffeurs in crisp uniforms assisted guests onto the red carpet. Inside, the grand ballroom radiated an almost otherworldly glow. A massive chandelier, dripping with crystals, hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a warm golden light over the room. Its brilliance reflected off polished marble floors and gilded mirrors that lined the walls. The tables were draped in ivory linens, each centerpiece an extravagant arrangement of roses and lilies. A live string quartet played a soft waltz in the corner, their music weaving effortlessly through the low hum of conversation. The room was filled with Edinburgh's elite, men in bespoke suits and women draped in shimmering gowns. They moved with practiced ease, exchanging handshakes and polite laughter, their voices tinged with the confidence of people who had never known want. It was a scene of wealth and privilege, a world that Liam Callahan had spent years mastering. Liam stood near the edge of the ballroom, perfectly poised, yet deliberately removed from the crowd. At first glance, he appeared to belong seamlessly among them. His midnight blue suit was tailored to perfection, accentuating his tall frame, and his dark hair was styled neatly, not a strand out of place. A glass of scotch rested lightly in his hand, though he barely sipped from it. But up close, there was a certain distance in Liam's eyes, a quiet detachment that no amount of charm could fully mask. To the outside world, Liam was the epitome of success. He was the boy who had grown into a self-made man, someone who had clawed his way to the top and stayed there. His name carried weight in business circles, his company thriving across multiple industries. Invitations to galas like this were as routine as his morning coffee. People gravitated toward him, seeking his approval, his connections, or perhaps just the shine of being near someone who seemed untouchable. But tonight, Liam felt anything but invincible. The gala, ostensibly organized to raise funds for struggling families, struck him as hollow. The cause was noble, yes, but the execution felt like a farce. Guests donated generously, but their motivations often seemed self-serving. A chance to be seen, to brag about their philanthropy at their next social gathering. Liam had been part of this charade for years, playing his role with precision. But recently, a gnawing emptiness had crept into his life, and no amount of success seemed to fill it. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, his thoughts drifting. The truth was, Liam had spent most of his life chasing the approval of people who wouldn't have noticed him otherwise. He had grown up in a modest household, his parents working tirelessly to make ends meet. As a boy, he'd dreamed of escaping that life, of proving to the world, and perhaps to himself, that he was worth something. And he had succeeded. The boy, who had once felt invisible, now stood among Edinburgh's most powerful, his name etched on invitations, his face recognizable in society pages. But the cost of that success had left him with scars he rarely acknowledged. Liam's rise had not been without its casualties. He thought of the people he had hurt along the way, the relationships he had neglected or discarded in his relentless pursuit of ambition. A familiar weight settled in his chest, one he couldn't quite shake. Regret had become a quiet companion, lingering in the shadows of his triumphs. He took a sip of his scotch, the warmth doing little to ease his restlessness. As the night progressed, Liam remained on the periphery, his polished demeanor hiding the storm within. He shook hands when necessary, exchanged pleasantries with acquaintances, and nodded along to conversations he barely registered. Yet amidst the sea of glittering gowns and tailored suits, Liam felt disconnected. The chandelier above sparkled like 1,000 stars, but it only served to remind him of how far he'd come, and how far he felt from any real sense of purpose. Liam's gaze swept the room, a habit born of years of careful observation. He could read people easily now, the flash of insecurity in someone's eyes, the calculated smiles of those angling for favor. It was a skill he had honed, one that had served him well in both business and social circles. But tonight, his focus wasn't on the guests or the deals being whispered about in corners. His thoughts drifted to something, or someone, he couldn't quite name. A part of him wondered if he was searching for something more than this, though he wouldn't admit it aloud. The irony wasn't lost on him. For years, he had craved this very acceptance, believing it would bring him fulfillment. Now that he had it, he found himself yearning for something he couldn't quite define, and then, through the crowd, something or someone caught his eye. The grand ballroom of Edinburgh's Marlow Hotel glimmered like a scene out of a fairy tale. A dazzling chandelier hung above, its golden light refracting like diamonds across the elegantly dressed guests. The air was filled with the soft melody of a live string quartet, blending seamlessly with the faint clink of champagne glasses and murmured conversations. Scotland's elite gathered here tonight, ostensibly to support the Glenmore Community Centre, though most seemed more interested in flaunting their wealth and connections. Liam Callahan stood near the edge of the ballroom, his tailored midnight blue suit impeccable. His glass of scotch rested lightly in his hand, though he barely sipped from it. To the outside world, he was the picture of confidence, a self-made millionaire with charm and wit. But beneath the polished surface, Liam felt hollow. This event, like so many others, was a performance, and Liam had grown weary of playing his part. Tonight was meant to showcase the very cause the gala claimed to support, yet it felt more like a circus of opulence. The irony wasn't lost on him. Liam had once been someone who valued appearances over substance, but now the gilded veneer of his life seemed to mock him. He had come here out of obligation, but deep down he hoped for something more. Though he couldn't quite name what, across the room, Ava Sinclair maneuvered carefully through the crowd. Her simple black server's uniform fit awkwardly, the stiff fabric rubbing against her skin. With a tray of champagne flutes balanced on one hand, she moved between groups of chatting guests, keeping her head down. Ava wasn't here for the glamour or the spectacle. She was here because she had no other choice. The Glenmore Community Centre, her life's work, was hanging by a thread. Ava had poured every ounce of herself into it, creating a haven for struggling families. But dwindling funds and mounting bills had pushed her to take this job, serving drinks at a gala that supposedly supported her cause. The bitter irony wasn't lost on her. She froze momentarily as her eyes landed on someone she never expected to see again. Liam Callahan. Her heart pounded as memories rushed back, unbidden and unwelcome. He looked different now, older, sharper, polished. But there was no mistaking him. Liam had been her tormentor in high school, the boy who made her life miserable with cruel jokes and snide comments. Seeing him now, surrounded by wealth and power, only deepened the sting. Ava tightened her grip on the tray, determined to avoid him. She had endured too much to let him ruin her night. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. Liam's gaze drifted absently across the room until it landed on her. At first, he didn't recognize her. there was something familiar about the way she moved. Graceful but guarded, like someone who had learned to navigate the world cautiously. And then it hit him. Ava Sinclair. The recognition struck like a bolt of lightning. His grip on his glass tightened as memories flooded back. He had bullied her, made cruel jokes at her expense, all for the sake of fitting in with his peers. At the time, he had dismissed it as harmless teasing, but now, standing in this grand ballroom, the weight of those moments pressed against his chest. Before he could stop himself, Liam started toward her, weaving through the crowd. He didn't know what he would say. An apology, perhaps? Small talk? He doubted she'd even remember him. But before he could reach her, Ava turned, her tray colliding with his chest. A crash echoed through the ballroom as champagne splashed across his suit, and the crystal glasses shattered on the floor. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and the quartet faltered before resuming their melody. "Oh my God," Ava stammered, her face pale as she scrambled to retrieve a napkin. I'm so sorry." Liam barely registered the cold dampness soaking his suit. His heart pounded as their eyes met. The shock in her gaze quickly gave way to something sharper. Anger. "You," Ava said, her voice low and icy. It wasn't a question. She recognized him instantly. "Ava," Liam began, his voice rougher than he intended. She straightened, her expression hardening. "Well, isn't this just perfect?" she said, sarcasm dripping from her words. "Liam Callahan, ruining my night again." Some things never change. The accusation hit harder than any spilled champagne. Liam opened his mouth to respond, but Ava wasn't finished. "What's the matter?" she continued, her tone scathing. "Surprised to see me serving drinks instead of sitting at one of your fancy tables?" Liam shook his head, guilt tightening his chest. "I didn't mean—" "Save it!" Ava snapped, cutting him off. She grabbed a towel from a nearby server station and began mopping the floor, her movements quick and efficient. Liam stood there, frozen, as she turned away without another word. The crowd around them resumed their conversations, the incident already forgotten. But Liam couldn't shake the image of Ava's anger, the pain in her voice as she walked away. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about his reputation or his wealth. He was thinking about Ava Sinclair and the scars he had left behind. The night's festivities continued, but for Liam Callahan, the glittering lights and murmured conversations had faded into the background. He remained at the edge of the ballroom, absently brushing at the champagne stain on his suit, though he knew the fabric was ruined. Not that it mattered. The cold dampness of the drink wasn't what left him feeling hollow. Ava Sinclair. He hadn't said her name aloud in years, but now it reverberated in his mind like an unrelenting drumbeat. Her voice, sharp with anger, echoed in his ears. "Liam Callahan, ruining my night again. Some things never change." His jaw tightened as he replayed the moment in his head. He hadn't intended for things to happen this way. He hadn't even meant to approach her. And yet, somehow, his presence had caused her pain all over again. He let out a slow breath, running a hand through his hair. Around him, Edinburgh's elite mingled with an effortless air, champagne flutes glinting in the golden light. Conversations ebbed and flowed. Deals were undoubtedly being made. But Liam felt like an outsider in a world he had spent years trying to master. When he first walked into this ballroom, he had been Liam Callahan, the self-made millionaire, a man respected and admired. Now, he felt exposed, like the insecure teenager he had been when he first met Ava. That night, Liam returned to his penthouse, the high-rise apartment that overlooked the city's skyline. The space was immaculate, with sleek modern furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased Edinburgh's twinkling lights. Yet it felt cold. Empty. He poured himself a glass of scotch, the amber liquid swirling as he sank into a leather armchair. Ava's face hovered in his thoughts, her glare sharp enough to cut through years of his carefully built armor. He hadn't thought about her in a long time, at least, not consciously. But seeing her tonight had ripped open a wound he hadn't realized was still there. Flashbacks came unbidden. The high school cafeteria, buzzing with the noise of teenagers. Liam had been at the center of the most popular table, his voice loud and confident. Ava, on the other hand, had always been on the fringes, her presence so quiet it was almost as if she were trying to disappear. But he had noticed her. Her thrift store clothes, her worn-out sneakers, the way she carried herself with quiet dignity despite the whispers. She hadn't been like the other kids. She didn't try to fit in, didn't seek their approval. And maybe that was why Liam had singled her out. "Nice shoes, Sinclair," he had said once, his voice carrying across the cafeteria. "What thrift store did you get those from?" Laughter had erupted from his table, the kind of loud, boisterous laughter that made him feel powerful. At the time, it had seemed harmless, just a joke. But it hadn't been harmless. He remembered the way Ava's face fell, her eyes lowering to the floor as if she wished it would swallow her whole. She hadn't responded. She never did. But her silence had been louder than any retort could have been. Liam swirled his scotch, his stomach twisting with guilt. At the time, he hadn't cared. He had been too busy trying to fit in, to be liked. And now, years later, he could see the truth for what it was. He had been a coward. The next morning, Liam found himself seated at his desk, staring at his laptop screen. He had barely slept, Ava's words replaying in his mind like a broken record. His assistant knocked lightly on the door, stepping in with her usual efficiency. "Mr. Callahan, your schedule for the day," she said, setting a folder on his desk. "Cancel my morning meetings," Liam said abruptly, not looking up. "Sir?" "I have something I need to take care of," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Once she left, Liam opened his laptop and began typing, "Ava Sinclair, Edinburgh." A list of results appeared, most of them unremarkable. A social media profile with minimal posts, a few news articles about community events. And then he found it, a fundraiser page for the Glenmore Community Center. Liam clicked the link, and a photo of Ava appeared on the screen. She was smiling, surrounded by children holding handmade signs that read, "Thank you." Her eyes, which had been so guarded last night, were warm and full of life in the photo. The description beneath the photo detailed the center's mission, a safe space for struggling families, offering after-school programs, meals, and resources. It was clear that Ava had poured her heart into the center. But a small detail caught Liam's attention: donations needed. The center was struggling financially. Liam leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He had built his life on finding solutions, on fixing problems. But this wasn't just about solving a financial issue. It was about something much deeper. He couldn't erase the past, but maybe, just maybe, he could do something that mattered. The next morning, Liam stood outside the Glenmore Community Center. The building was modest, with faded brickwork and a small sign above the door. It was a stark contrast to the opulence of the world Liam was used to, but it had a warmth that no ballroom could replicate. As he stepped inside, the sounds of children's laughter filled the air. The walls were decorated with colorful drawings, and the shelves were lined with donated books. It was a place built with love and heart. Liam spotted Ava at the far end of the hall, speaking softly to a group of volunteers. Her hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and she wore a simple sweater and jeans. She looked different here, relaxed, in her element, but when she turned and saw him, the warmth in her expression vanished. Her eyes narrowed, her posture stiffening. "What are you doing here?" she asked, crossing her arms as she approached him. Liam cleared his throat, suddenly unsure of himself. "I read about the center. I wanted to see it for myself." Ava's gaze didn't soften. "Why? Trying to clear your conscience after last night?" Liam shook his head. "Number I wanted to help." Ava let out a bitter laugh. "Help? People like you think you can just throw money at a problem and make it go away. But this place isn't something you can fix with a check, Liam." "I'm not here to write a check," he said quietly. I want to understand." Her jaw tightened, her anger simmering just beneath the surface. "You don't get to rewrite the past, Liam. You don't get to bully someone for years and then show up here acting like the hero." Her words cut deeper than Liam cared to admit, but instead of arguing, he nodded. "You're right," he said softly. "I can't rewrite the past, but I can try to be better. If you'll let me." The sincerity in his voice gave Ava pause, but her walls didn't come down. "We don't need your help," she said, her voice steady but cold. "We're doing fine without your charity." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving Liam standing alone in the quiet hallway, guilt and determination warring within him. The air inside the Glenmore Community Center was thick with activity. As volunteers hustled between rooms, children's laughter echoing through the halls. For Ava Sinclair, it was a sanctuary, a place she had built with grit, love, and relentless determination. Yet, as she sat in her modest office that evening, her mind wasn't on the day's successes. It was on Liam Callahan. His sudden reappearance had thrown her off balance, stirring emotions she thought she had buried long ago. Anger, pain, distrust. They all simmered beneath the surface. But something else lingered too: curiosity. Despite herself, Ava found her thoughts returning to the look in his eyes. There had been vulnerability there, something genuine she hadn't expected. Still, she wasn't ready to trust him. Liam Callahan had been the source of some of her worst memories, and no amount of apologies or well-meaning gestures would erase that, or so she thought. The next morning, Liam was back at the community center. Ava spotted him immediately, dressed more casually than before in dark jeans and a sweater. He looked out of place, standing in the doorway as though unsure where to go. Ava groaned inwardly. Why is he here again? But before she could confront him, one of the children ran up to him, a little boy named Theo, no older than 6. "Are you here to play football with us?" Theo asked eagerly, clutching a slightly deflated ball. Liam knelt, meeting Theo's wide-eyed gaze. "Football, huh? I'm not very good, but I'll give it a shot." Theo grinned and tugged at Liam's hand, pulling him toward the playroom. Ava watched from the hallway, arms crossed, as Liam disappeared into the crowd of children. She wanted to be annoyed, to tell him to leave, but something stopped her. By mid-afternoon, Ava was in the supply closet, sorting through donations, when she heard laughter spilling into the hallway. She peeked out and saw Liam sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by a group of kids. He was holding up a drawing, exaggeratedly tilting his head. "What do you think, guys? Is this a tree or a broccoli on a stick?" The kids erupted into giggles, pointing at the paper. "It's a tree!" shouted Mia, a girl with pigtails and a paintbrush in hand. Liam clutched his chest in mock disbelief. "A tree? I was so sure it was broccoli. You've saved me from a terrible mistake." Ava couldn't help the faint smile tugging at her lips. "What is he doing?" As the days passed, Liam kept showing up. He didn't ask for attention, Nor did he bring grand gestures or flashy donations. Instead, he rolled up his sleeves and got to work. He organized supplies, painted walls, repaired broken furniture, and even helped the children with their homework. He quickly became a favorite among the kids, who took to calling him Mr. Liam. His easygoing nature and willingness to laugh at himself endeared him to them, and soon the laughter and energy he brought began to ripple through the center. But Ava remained wary. One evening, as Ava was finishing up paperwork in her office, Liam knocked softly on the doorframe. "Do you need a hand with anything?" he asked. She looked up, startled. "I think you've done enough for one day," she said curtly. Liam hesitated, but stepped inside anyway, his expression earnest. "I don't want to get in your way," he said. "I just want to help." Ava set down her pen, leaning back in her chair. "Why, Liam?" she asked, her tone sharp. "Why are you really here? Is it guilt? Redemption? What?" He met her gaze, his jaw tightening slightly. "I'm here because I meant what I said. I want to make things right." "And you think fixing chairs and playing with kids is going to undo everything?" Ava shot back, her voice rising. Liam flinched, but didn't back down. "No," he said softly. "I know I can't undo the past, but that doesn't mean I shouldn't try to do better now." Ava stared at him, searching his face for signs of insincerity. But all she saw was vulnerability. The next day, Ava overheard Liam talking with Theo in the playroom. "My dad used to play football with me," Theo said, his voice quiet. "Before he left. Now it's just me and my mum." Liam nodded, his tone gentle. "That's tough, Theo. But you've got your mum, and you've got this place. That's pretty special." Theo grinned up at him. "Do you have a mum and dad?" Liam's smile faltered slightly, but he nodded. "I did. They're not here anymore, though." "What happened?" Theo asked innocently. Liam hesitated, glancing down at the football in his hands. "There was an accident when I was younger. They didn't make it." The words hung heavy in the air, and Ava felt a pang in her chest. She hadn't known. That evening, Ava approached Liam as he was packing up supplies. "I didn't know about your parents," she said quietly. Liam glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "It's not something I talk about often." "Why?" He shrugged, setting down a box. "Because it's easier to bury it, to focus on work, success, anything that keeps me from feeling it." He paused, his gaze distant. "But it catches up to you eventually, no matter how far you run." Ava studied him, her guard lowering slightly. "Is that why you've been showing up here?" "Part of it," he admitted. "But mostly, it's because I want to help you, and because I don't want to be the person I was back then." Ava sighed, crossing her arms. "Liam, this isn't easy for me. I've spent years trying to forget you." "I know," he said, his voice steady. "And I don't expect forgiveness, but I'll keep showing up, for as long as it takes." For the first time, Ava didn't argue. The Glenmore Community Center buzzed with life, the sound of children's laughter mixing with the hum of volunteers preparing for an upcoming holiday event. Twinkling lights framed the windows, giving the building a warm glow against the chill of the Scottish winter. Ava Sinclair stood near the entrance, her hands full of donation boxes, but her thoughts elsewhere. For weeks, Liam Callahan had been a constant presence. He had painted walls, fixed furniture, read bedtime stories, and somehow managed to charm every child who crossed his path. But his persistence wasn't what had kept Ava up at night. It was his sincerity, his words, his actions, even the way he spoke to the children. It all felt genuine, and as much as Ava hated to admit it, she had begun to see a different side of him, one that was patient, kind, and deeply human. Still, a part of her remained guarded. Liam had hurt her before, and the scars of those years weren't so easily erased. But tonight, something felt different. The center grew quieter as the evening wore on. Families trickled out into the night, and volunteers began packing up. Ava found herself in the playroom, organizing art supplies, when she noticed Liam standing in the doorway. "Need a hand?" he asked, his voice soft. Ava looked up, startled. "I think I've got it," she replied, though her tone lacked its usual edge. Liam stepped into the room anyway, picking up a stray paintbrush. "It's getting late," he said, his gaze steady. "You should go home." Ava raised an eyebrow. "You're one to talk. You're here more than I am these days." He chuckled, setting the brush down. "Maybe I like being here." Ava turned back to the shelves, focusing on the jars of paint she was arranging. "Why, Liam? Why are you really here?" The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded. Liam hesitated, then stepped closer. "I told you," he began, his voice quieter now. "I'm trying to make things right." Ava sighed, turning to face him. "And I told you. You can't fix the past." "I know," Liam said, his expression serious. "But this isn't just about the past, Ava. It's about now. It's about you." Her breath caught at the intensity in his gaze. "What are you talking about?" Liam took another step closer, his hands at his sides, his voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. "I'm talking about the fact that I've never stopped thinking about you." Ava blinked, stunned. "Liam, I mean it," he interrupted, his tone earnest. "Even back then, I noticed you. I noticed how strong you were, how smart, how you didn't care what anyone thought. And I hated that I couldn't be like you. So instead of admiring you, I hurt you." His words hit like a wave, the weight of his confession pulling at something deep inside her. Ava's arms crossed instinctively, a shield against the emotions swirling in her chest. "You hurt me a lot, Liam," she said quietly. "I know," he replied, his voice cracking slightly. "And I hated myself for it. But seeing you now, seeing what you've built, and the person you've become, I can't ignore it. I can't ignore you." Ava shook her head, her voice trembling. "You don't know me anymore." "Yes, I do," Liam said firmly. "You're the same Ava who stood up to the world when no one else would. You're still strong, still kind, still someone worth fighting for." Her heart raced as he stepped even closer, the sincerity in his eyes undeniable. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he continued, his voice softening. "But I can't pretend anymore. I love you, Ava. I think I always have." The room felt impossibly quiet, the weight of his words settling over them. Ava's mind raced, her emotions clashing in a storm of anger, fear, and something dangerously close to hope. She took a shaky breath. "Liam, I don't know if I can trust you. I don't know if I can—" "I'm not asking for everything right now," he said gently. "I'm just asking for a chance. Let me prove that I've changed. Let me prove that I'm not the boy I was back then." For a long moment, Ava said nothing. She studied him, searching for any hint of deception, any trace of the arrogance that had once defined him. But all she saw was a man willing to lay himself bare. Finally, she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "One chance, Liam. That's all you get." A smile broke across his face, genuine and unguarded. "I won't waste it." Over the next few weeks, Liam's actions spoke louder than words ever could. He continued volunteering at the center, but now his presence felt different. He wasn't just there to help, he was there to connect. He listened when Ava spoke about the struggles of running the center. He stayed late to clean up after events, even when no one was watching. and slowly, Ava began to let her walls down. One evening, as they strung holiday lights around the playroom, their hands brushed. Ava froze, her cheeks warming as she glanced at him. Liam met her gaze, his expression soft but steady. "You're really not going to give up, are you?" she asked, half smiling. "Not a chance," he replied, his voice warm, and for the first time, Ava felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: hope. The Glenmore Community Center buzzed with energy as the annual holiday event unfolded. Children darted between tables covered in crafts and games, their laughter filling the halls. Parents mingled with volunteers, enjoying the warm glow of the decorations that adorned every corner. Ava Sinclair stood near the entrance, taking it all in. The past few weeks had been transformative. Slowly, cautiously, she had allowed Liam Callahan back into her life, not as the arrogant boy who had once caused her pain, but as the man he was now. He had proven himself through actions, not just words. She spotted him across the room, standing near the Christmas tree with a group of children. They were busy hanging handmade ornaments, and Liam was crouched beside them, offering encouragement as they carefully placed each piece. One little girl, Mia, tugged on his sleeve, and he leaned down to listen intently, his face lighting up at whatever she whispered. Ava couldn't help but smile. He had become part of this place in ways she hadn't expected. Later that evening, as the event wound down, Liam found her in the playroom. The soft twinkle of holiday lights reflected in his eyes as he approached, hands in his pockets. "You look like someone who could use a break," he said with a grin, motioning to the chair beside her. Ava laughed lightly, sitting down. "You're not wrong. These events are wonderful, but they're exhausting." He sat next to her, their shoulders almost touching. For a moment, they watched the flickering lights in comfortable silence. "You've done something incredible here," Liam said softly. Ava glanced at him, her voice quiet. "I didn't do it alone." He turned to her, his expression serious. "You gave me a chance, Ava. That means everything to me." Her heart fluttered at the sincerity in his voice. "You earned it, Liam. You've shown me that. You're not the same person you were." "I'm not," he said firmly, "but I wouldn't have become the person I am now without you. You taught me more than you realize, about strength, resilience, and forgiveness." Ava hesitated, emotions welling up in her chest. "I was scared to trust you," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "But you've proven that you mean it. And I think I'm ready to move forward." Liam reached for her hand, his grip gentle but steady. "With me?" She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "With you." Weeks later, the center was alive with even more excitement than usual. Ava stood in the garden, surrounded by families and volunteers, as a ribbon was cut on a new wing of the building. A hand-carved wooden sign above the entrance read, "Sinclair Hall, dedicated to hope and community." Ava's breath caught as she read the plaque, her heart swelling with emotion. Liam had kept the dedication a secret, but as he stood beside her now, his smile was warm and knowing. "This is incredible," she whispered. "It's the least I could do," Liam replied. "You've built something beautiful here, Ava, and I want to be part of it, for as long as you'll let me." She looked at him, her smile softening. "For as long as we both can." The event ended with laughter, hugs, and tears of joy. And as the sun dipped low on the horizon, Ava and Liam sat together on the center's steps, watching the children play. No words were needed between them. In the quiet, they both knew they had found something rare, something worth fighting for. Their journey hadn't been easy, and their pasts would always be part of them. But together, they had chosen to build something new, a future defined not by mistakes, but by love, hope, and the courage to grow. Did this touching story of redemption and newfound love move your heart? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more stories of hope, transformation, and the strength it takes to rebuild trust. Together, let's honor the beauty of second chances and the courage to embrace a brighter future. See you in the next inspiring tale.